The ocean doesn't care about your heartbreak. That's what I've learned in the year since I left my old life behind, stood up, and walked away from the carefully constructed facade of my marriage, our 3-bedroom Victorian with the carved porch railings, the neighborhood where the barista knew our coffee orders by heart. The waves just keep coming, indifferent to whether you're whole or shattered. There's comfort in that, eventually. I stand on the small balcony of my apartment, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, watching dawn break over the water. The sky bleeds pink into gray, and somewhere down the beach a dog barks. My phone vibrates against the wooden railing. Eliza, confirming Sophie's visit this weekend. Sophie is excited to see the new bookstore display. We'll be there by 11. So formal, these texts between us now. As if we are business associates who happen to share a child. I don't reply immediately. Instead, I let myself remember when I first noticed something had shifted between us, 6 months before she left. It was at the Hendersons' dinner party, one of those carefully curated gatherings where everyone brings wine they can't quite afford, and conversations drift between home renovations and school districts. I was in the kitchen helping Richard with a corkscrew that had seen better days, when Eliza's laugh cut through the ambient noise, a specific laugh I hadn't heard in months, maybe years. It had a breathless quality to it, like she'd been caught off guard by genuine amusement. I found her in the living room, perched on the arm of a chair while a man I didn't recognize showed her something on his camera. Julian, though I wouldn't learn his name until later. He was telling her about a sunrise in Bali, gesturing with one hand while the other remained close to her knee, not touching, but occupying the same gravity. The colors were impossible, he was saying. The kind of thing you're certain you've imagined until you see the photograph afterward. Eliza touched her neck, a gesture I knew well, her tell when she was captivated. I've always wanted to see the Pacific Islands, she said, though in 12 years of marriage she'd never once mentioned this desire to me. You should, he replied, with the casual certainty of someone who'd never considered not following an impulse. His eyes held hers a beat too long. The world opens up when you decide to see it. I stood in the doorway, wine bottle dangling forgotten from my fingers, and watched my wife lean forward slightly, drawn by the gravity of a different life. Later, in the car ride home, she was unusually quiet. You okay? I asked, eyes on the road. Do you ever feel like we're just playing house? She said, looking out the passenger window. What do you mean? Like we're still pretending to be adults, going through the motions, dinner parties and school conferences and comparing mortgage rates. I could have asked what she wanted instead. I could have admitted that sometimes, lying awake at night, I wondered if we'd become the kind of people we once swore we wouldn't. Predictable, risk-averse, defined by routine. Instead, I said, well, I did convince Mrs. Henderson I know about wine pairings, so clearly my acting skills are improving. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're good at making everything seem okay. One of us has to be, I said lightly, and she turned back to the window. That's how we'd always operated. Her restlessness, my accommodation. Her seeking, my anchoring. For years it had been a balance that worked, until suddenly it didn't. But I didn't understand that yet. I ignored the other signs, too. The sudden interest in travel documentaries, the new clothes that seemed slightly off from her usual style, the text notifications she'd check and then place her phone face down, the late nights at work that coincided with her marketing firm taking on a new client, a boutique travel agency specializing in transformative experiences. When I found the hotel receipt while doing laundry, it was almost a relief, confirmation I wasn't inventing problems. The paper was crisp between my fingers, folded neatly in her coat pocket. 4 hours at the Westwood Hotel downtown, a Tuesday when she'd told me she had a lunch meeting that ran long. I returned it exactly as I'd found it, smoothing the crease with my thumbnail. That night I lay awake beside her sleeping form, cataloging possible explanations that didn't involve betrayal. A surprise she was planning. A place to rest during a migraine. A shower and change after spilling something on herself before an important meeting. I'd always been good at constructing narratives that allowed us both to avoid confrontation. It was a skill I'd perfected in childhood, watching my mother make excuses for my father's absences until the day he didn't come home at all. I learned then that sometimes silence is the only power you have, the ability to pretend you don't see what's happening until you're ready to face it. But the weight of unasked questions was changing me. I moved through our house like a detective, searching for evidence while simultaneously hiding my investigation. I'd become a stranger in my own marriage, watching my wife for clues about who we were becoming, and through it all, we continued our routines, family dinners and weekend outings and evening rituals with Sophie. I'd like to say I was staying silent to gather courage for an inevitable confrontation. But the truth is simpler and more cowardly. I was afraid of what would happen when there were no more excuses left between us. Saturday morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, catching in Sophie's hair as she methodically separated her cereal. Cheerios to the left, sliced strawberries to the right, creating a dry moat around a small island of milk. 10 years old, and already so certain about how things should be arranged in her world. "Dad, can we get a dog yet?" she asked, not for the first time that month. "Still working on Mom," I said, sliding scrambled eggs onto a plate. "Complex negotiations take time." From behind her coffee mug, Eliza said, "Your father thinks he's being diplomatic, but what he means is he's the one who'd end up walking it in the rain." "I would help," Sophie insisted. "I'd walk it every day after school. I'd even pick up the poop." "Bold claim," I said, sitting down with my own plate. "Let's revisit this when you remember to put your shoes in the closet instead of the middle of the hallway." Sophie sighed dramatically, then brightened. "Can we go to the bookstore today? I finished my other books." "Actually," Eliza said, "I was thinking you and I could have a girls' day. Mani-pedis, lunch at that place with the good milkshakes, maybe some shopping?" Sophie's face lit up. "Can we go to the craft store too? I need stuff for my science project." "Whatever you want, baby." Eliza's smile was warm, but her eyes briefly met mine with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Let's make it special." Now, standing on my balcony a year later, I understand what that look meant. She was creating memories, knowing she'd need them during her absence. She was saying goodbye while pretending it was just another Saturday. After breakfast, I headed to the bookstore, my refuge long before it became my livelihood. Mercer & Sons occupied a corner space in a century-old building downtown, with weathered wooden floors that creaked in specific places and tall windows that filled the space with natural light. My grandfather had opened it. My father reluctantly maintained it before abandoning both it and us, and I had rescued it from near closure after college. Its history mirrored my own, obligations inherited, choices made reluctantly, then embraced. A place defined by both legacy and reinvention. "You look like someone stole your favorite bookmark," Maya said, appearing beside me as I arranged a new display of contemporary fiction. Her cafe shared a wall with my store, and she had an uncanny ability to sense when I needed distraction. "Just tired," I replied, straightening a stack of novels. "Sophie had a nightmare last night." Maya studied me over the rim of her glasses. "You're doing that thing with your jaw." "What thing?" "That clenching thing that means you're either angry or worried." I consciously relaxed my face. "It's nothing. Eliza's leaving for Chicago tomorrow. 2-week marketing project. Just thinking about single parenting while working full-time." Maya nodded slowly. "You know I can help with Sophie if you need. She can hang out at the cafe after school. Do homework at one of the tables." "I appreciate that," I said, genuinely grateful for her friendship. Maya had been there through every crisis of my adult life. My father's heart attack, Sophie's premature birth, the year the bookstore nearly went under. She knew when to push and when to let things be. How about I bring over some of those cardamom cookies you like when I close up? We can complain about customers and you can tell me what's really bothering you. I managed a smile. Rain check? I should probably be home early tonight since Eliza's leaving tomorrow. After work, I picked up Sophie from her friend's house, listening to her chatter about the day's adventures, the manicures, pale blue with silver stars, the lunch, double cheeseburger, extra pickles, chocolate milkshake, the craft store haul, popsicle sticks, glitter glue, foam planets for her solar system diorama. She was luminous with happiness, and I felt a stab of something like jealousy. Not of the attention Eliza gave her, but of Sophie's unquestioning certainty that her world was solid and permanent. At home, Eliza was packing, her suitcase open on our bed like a mouth waiting to be fed. Chicago in February, she said when I appeared in the doorway. I packed 3 sweaters and still feel underprepared. You hate the cold, I said, watching her fold a blouse I'd never seen before. Deep emerald silk that would bring out the gold flecks in her eyes. I'll survive. She placed the blouse carefully between tissue paper. The client's paying a fortune for this campaign. Martin says if we land it, I'm up for a promotion. Martin, her boss, who I'd met at holiday parties, a man with aggressive handshakes and strategic compliments. I'd never fully trusted him, but now I wondered if that distrust had been misplaced. Perhaps Martin wasn't the one I should have been watching. Sophie had a good time today, I said. She's growing up so fast. Eliza's hands paused on a sweater. Sometimes I look at her and can't believe we made that person. She's becoming someone new every day. That's what people do, I said, more sharply than I intended. Eliza gave me a long look. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I sighed. Just tired. Need help with anything? The moment passed, tension dissolving into routine. We made dinner, helped Sophie start her project, watched an episode of the baking show we followed together. Normal family evening, the kind that made up the fabric of our lives. But beneath it all ran a current of wrongness I couldn't name. Like furniture shifted slightly in a familiar room, just enough to make you stumble. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Eliza came to bed with an intensity that surprised me. Her hands traced my face as if memorizing its contours. And when we made love, she kept her eyes open, watching me with an expression that seemed almost like grief. Afterward, she curled against me, her head on my chest, where she could hear my heartbeat. I love you, she said, so quietly I almost missed it. I love you too, I replied automatically, stroking her hair. In the dark, with her breathing slowly evening into sleep, I catalogued the emotions swirling beneath my ribs. Concern, confusion, a dull anger I wasn't ready to acknowledge, and beneath it all, fear. Not just of what might be happening, but of confronting it, of becoming the person who asks questions that can't be unasked. In the story I was telling myself, doubt was just another form of love, the willingness to look away to preserve what mattered. I didn't yet understand that some forms of preservation are actually slow poison, that silence can be its own kind of betrayal. 3 days into Eliza's trip, I was shelving new arrivals when my phone rang. The caller ID showed her office number, and I felt a spike of anxiety before answering. Daniel? It's Caroline from Eliza's office. Her voice had the overbright quality people use when something's wrong, but they're trying to sound normal. Sorry to bother you, but is Eliza feeling better? Martin was wondering when she'll be back. My hand tightened on the phone. Back from Chicago, you mean? A beat of silence. Chicago? She called in sick on Monday. Said she had that stomach bug that's going around. I turned away from the customer browsing nearby, lowering my voice. There must be some confusion. She left Sunday for a 2-week marketing project in Chicago, for the travel agency client. Another pause, longer this time. Daniel, we finished that pitch last month. We didn't get the account. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I mumbled something about miscommunication, promised to have Eliza call, and hung up. For several minutes, I stood motionless in the aisle, a book dangling forgotten from my hand, while my mind raced through possibilities, each more implausible than the last. A secret project, a misunderstanding between departments, an elaborate surprise involving her job. But beneath these desperate rationalizations, a colder truth was taking shape. That evening, after leaving Gavin, my assistant manager, to close the store, I began my investigation. The hotel in Chicago confirmed they had no reservation under Eliza's name. The airline had no record of her on any flight to O'Hare. Her toothbrush was gone from our bathroom, along with specific items from her closet. Not the haphazard selection of someone packing in a hurry, but carefully chosen pieces, as if for a curated capsule wardrobe. Most telling of all was the missing passport from our fireproof safe, a document unnecessary for domestic travel. Sophie was at her grandmother's for the night, a standing monthly arrangement that now seemed suspiciously convenient. Alone in the house, I moved from room to room with growing dread, seeing our shared life through new eyes. The framed wedding photo where Eliza's smile seemed forced in retrospect. The careful division of the closet where her most expensive clothes were missing. The desk drawer where I found it, a handwritten note on the stationery she used for important correspondence, hidden beneath tax documents I'd never have reason to look at while she was supposedly away for just 2 weeks. I need to know if there's more than this. 5 words. Her handwriting unusually messy, as if written in haste or emotion. Not "I need more than this" or "there has to be more than this." Statements of certainty. But I need to know. The appeal of someone testing a hypothesis, conducting an experiment whose parameters included my ignorance. That night, I sat on our bed. My bed now, at least temporarily, holding her pillow in my lap. The house was abnormally quiet. The kind of silence that feels like pressure against your eardrums. A memory surfaced. My mother sitting just like this on the night my father didn't come home, her face carefully blank as she told 7-year-old me that sometimes people needed space to figure things out, that it didn't mean they didn't love us. 29 years later, I finally understood the courage it took for her to sit still instead of screaming or breaking things. The superhuman effort of containing an explosion so her child wouldn't be wounded by the shrapnel. I didn't sleep. Instead, I moved through the house collecting evidence I'd been avoiding for months. Credit card statements showing charges at restaurants I'd never heard of on nights she was supposedly working late. A text message preview on her iPad, forgotten in her haste, battery almost dead, from someone named Jay. Passport ready? Adventure awaits. By morning, I had constructed a skeleton of the truth, though many details remained shadowy. The precise nature of her relationship with this Jay. How long it had been going on. Whether she intended to come back. What story she would tell Sophie and me when she did. That night I learned that betrayal has a sound. The perfect silence of questions you never thought to ask. The thing about modern betrayal is that it leaves digital fingerprints. We live so much of our lives online that disappearing completely requires either extraordinary technological savvy or a level of premeditation that borders on pathological. Eliza had neither. In the gray light of morning, Sophie still safely at her grandmother's, I sat at our shared desktop computer. We'd bought it together 3 years ago, agreeing it would live in the small alcove off the kitchen, neutral territory, not quite my office or hers. I rarely used it, preferring my laptop for bookstore inventory and finances. Eliza used it for larger projects, photo editing, our family budget tracking. Small tasks in service of our joined life. I typed in the password we shared, Sophie's birthday, followed by the street number of our first apartment. The screen blinked awake, displaying a desktop background of the three of us at the coast last summer, squinting into sun and salt air. I looked at our pixelated smiles and wondered if Eliza was already planning her escape when that photo was taken. Her browser history had been cleared, but the credit card website remembered her login. 2 tickets to Barcelona, purchased 4 days before her business trip. One in her name, one in the name Julian Reynolds, a hotel reservation in the Gothic Quarter, the clinical details of betrayal laid out in sans serif font. I sat back, suddenly lightheaded. Not just an affair, then. Not just a hotel room downtown during lunch breaks, but something premeditated. Something that required passports and planning and 6,000 miles of distance. Something that felt less like a moment of weakness and more like a deliberate choice. My hands hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. There was still a line I hadn't crossed. The invasion of her private communications. But that boundary seemed absurd now. A polite fiction in a relationship already shattered by secrets. I opened her tablet, plugged it in, and found what I was looking for in her forgotten email account. The exchanges between them stretched back 6 months. The initial messages were professional. He'd photographed an event for her firm, was sending images for their marketing materials. Then coffee to discuss a potential collaboration. Then conversations that spilled beyond work into personal territory. Books they both loved, places he'd traveled, her childhood dream of becoming a photojournalist before she settled for marketing. "I've never told anyone that before," she wrote. "Sometimes I wonder who I'd be if I'd taken that risk." "It's never too late to find out," he replied. I scrolled through months of their relationship developing in plain sight, hidden only by my trust and inattention. The first time they met outside of work. The first oblique reference to feelings beyond friendship. The gradual shift in tone from cautious to intimate to urgent. Then, 3 weeks ago, a pivot. What if we just went? Not forever, just a month. Spain, Italy, maybe Greece. No plans, no reservations beyond the first week. Just us seeing what's possible together. Her response came 2 days later. "I can't just leave my family. I'm not asking forever. Just a month to explore who you might be outside of wife and mother and marketing executive. A month to remember the person who wanted to capture stories around the world." Bile rose in my throat as I read her final email to him, sent the day before she left. 1 month. I'll tell them it's work. When we get back, I'll figure out what I want, but I need this. I need to know who I am when I'm not being who everyone expects me to be. I closed the tablet and went to the bathroom, where I was violently sick. Afterward, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. The man looking back at me seemed like a stranger, hollow-eyed, pale, someone who'd just discovered the story of his life had been fiction. The worst part wasn't that she'd left. It wasn't even that she'd lied. It was the revelation that while I'd been building our life together, brick by careful brick, she'd been secretly wondering if she'd chosen wrong. That while I'd been content, she'd been calculating escape routes. By the time I picked up Sophie from my mother-in-law's that afternoon, I'd composed myself enough to maintain the fiction that everything was normal. I answered Patricia's questions about Eliza's business trip with vague details about marketing presentations and client dinners, all while Sophie chatted excitedly about the cookies they'd baked and the movie they'd watched. "Mom said to tell you she'll call tonight," Sophie said as we drove home. "Do you think she's having fun in Chicago?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I'm sure she's keeping busy." "I miss her already," Sophie said, looking out the window at passing houses. 2 weeks is a really long time." "It'll go by before you know it," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. That night after Sophie was asleep, I received a text from Eliza. "Miss you both. Chicago is freezing. Project going well, but long days. Kiss S for me. Talk tomorrow." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decipher what it meant that she was maintaining the lie even in private communication. Was it guilt? Self-preservation? Or was she texting from some cafe in Barcelona, Julian beside her, both of them laughing at how easily I'd been fooled? I didn't reply. Instead, I poured myself a whiskey I didn't really want and sat in our darkened living room, surrounded by the artifacts of our shared history. Wedding photos, Sophie's baby handprint in clay, the ugly lamp Eliza's aunt had given us that we kept out of obligation, the painting we'd bought on our 10th anniversary, an abstract that had made us both stop and stare for different reasons. She loved the bold colors. I was drawn to the careful structure beneath the chaos. All these objects suddenly seemed like museum pieces, carefully preserved relics of something no longer living. That night, I slept on the couch, unwilling to return to our bed. Sometime before dawn, I made a decision. I would not confront her via text. I would not demand explanations from 6,000 miles away. I would wait for her return, for her to face me and Sophie and the wreckage she'd left behind. And then we would see what, if anything, could be salvaged. But as the days passed, as I moved through the motions of work and parenting and maintaining the fiction that Eliza was exactly where she claimed to be, something shifted inside me. The initial shock crystallized into a cold clarity. I found myself watching Sophie, her absolute trust that her world was stable, her certainty that both her parents were exactly who she believed us to be, and I understood that the real betrayal wasn't against me. It was against her. A week after Eliza left, I received another text. "Project taking longer than expected. Need to stay another week. Can you handle things? We'll make it up to both of you when I'm back." That was when I knew with absolute certainty that she had no intention of returning when she'd originally claimed, that 2 weeks had always been a fiction, a placeholder to buy time while she explored what was possible with Julian. That she expected me to wait patiently, maintaining our life in suspended animation until she decided whether or not she wanted to claim it again. And something in me, something I hadn't known existed, quietly, decisively, broke. "Dad, are we really going to visit Grandpa?" Sophie asked from the back seat, her voice carrying a note of suspicion. We rarely visited my father, a fact she was old enough to have noticed. "We really are," I said, checking the rearview mirror to see her frowning at her tablet. "He's looking forward to seeing you. Does he even remember what I look like?" The question landed like a small stone in my chest. "Of course he does. He has your school picture on his fridge." Sophie made a non-committal sound and returned to her game. I couldn't blame her skepticism. Thomas Mercer had been, at best, a sporadic presence in my life, and consequently in hers. After leaving my mother and me when I was 7, he'd maintained just enough contact to technically qualify as present. Holiday phone calls, occasional weekend visits that grew less frequent as I entered adolescence, a check for my college tuition that arrived with a terse note about making something of yourself. Our adult relationship consisted primarily of stilted monthly phone calls and obligatory gatherings that neither of us particularly enjoyed. When Sophie was born, something seemed to shift in him, a softening, a desire for connection that hadn't been there before. But old patterns are hard to break, and neither of us quite knew how to bridge the decades of distance between us. I hadn't planned to visit him today, but after a sleepless night considering my options, what to tell Sophie about her mother's extended absence, how to maintain the facade of normalcy when I felt anything but normal, I found myself craving something I couldn't quite name. Not advice, exactly. Not even comfort. but perhaps perspective from the only other person who might understand what it meant to have the certainty of your life suddenly revoked. Thomas lived an hour outside the city in a modest ranch house with a meticulously maintained garden. At 72, he'd grown leaner but no less imposing, still ramrod straight, still with the military precision in his movements that had made him seem like a visiting dignitary in our chaotic household when I was a child. "You should have called first," he said by way of greeting, but he was already bending to Sophie's level. "Look who's gotten taller since Christmas. You must be what, 15 now?" Sophie giggled despite herself. "I'm 10, Grandpa." "10? That can't be right. When I was 10, I was half your size." He straightened, nodding at me. "Daniel." "Dad?" I replied, the words still feeling formal in my mouth even after all these years. Inside, his house was exactly as I remembered it. Impeccably clean, sparsely decorated, with nothing out of place. The opposite of the warm clutter of my childhood home, of the lived-in comfort of the house I shared with Eliza and Sophie. Here, everything had its designated spot and purpose. Even the few photographs displayed on the mantel were arranged with geometric precision. While Sophie explored the backyard, where my father had recently installed a bird feeder station, he and I sat at his kitchen table with mugs of coffee neither of us particularly wanted. "So," he said, after an awkward silence. "This is unexpected." "Sophie had a day off school, teacher work day." The lie came easily, another in the growing collection I'd accumulated in the past week. My father studied me over the rim of his mug. His eyes, the same hazel as mine, as Sophie's, missed nothing. And Eliza couldn't take her? "Eliza's in Chicago, business trip." He nodded slowly. Another silence stretched between us, this one weighted with unasked questions. Finally, he said, "You look like hell, son." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Thanks. I mean it. You look like I did the week before I left your mother." The words hit me like a physical blow. In 30 years, we had never directly discussed his departure. Not the reasons behind it, not the aftermath, not what it had done to my mother and me. It was the negative space around which our entire relationship had been structured. "Is that what this is about?" he continued, his voice matter-of-fact. "You're thinking of leaving?" "No," I said sharply, then more quietly. "The opposite, actually." Understanding dawned in his expression. "Ah?" That single syllable contained multitudes. Recognition, a hint of sympathy, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Not quite satisfaction, but perhaps the grim validation of someone whose worldview has been confirmed. "How did you know?" I asked, the question escaping before I could consider whether I wanted the answer. "When Mom was—" I glanced toward the window, where Sophie was crouched by the bird feeder, carefully placing seeds. "When things weren't right." My father's hands, large, calloused from decades of construction work before retirement, wrapped around his coffee mug. Little things at first. Phone calls that stopped when I entered a room. A new interest in her appearance that had nothing to do with me. The way she'd check her watch during family dinners. He paused. But mostly it was the way she looked at me when she thought I couldn't see her. Like she was trying to reconcile the life she had with the one she thought she deserved. I flinched. The description matched perfectly with what I'd been seeing in Eliza for months. The appraising glances, the calculations I could almost see running behind her eyes. "Your mother wasn't discreet," he continued. "Or perhaps I wasn't as oblivious as she hoped. Either way, by the time I found actual evidence, I'd known for months." "So you left." I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. "You left us?" "I left her," he corrected. "I tried to take you with me." This was new information, a revision to the story I'd carried my whole life. "What?" "Your mother fought for full custody. given what I knew about her activities. I could have contested it, made things ugly, but you were 7, already confused enough. He shrugged, a gesture that failed to convey the casualness he clearly intended. I made a choice. The wrong one, I said, the old anger rising despite my best efforts to suppress it. Probably, he agreed, surprising me. I've made a lot of those, but at the time it seemed like the only way to give you some stability. One household, one set of rules. No shuttling back and forth between parents who couldn't stand each other. I wanted to challenge him, to point out the flaws in his reasoning, but Sophie chose that moment to race back inside, cheeks flushed with excitement. Dad, Grandpa, a cardinal came to the feeder. A real one, bright red, just like in my bird book. The conversation was effectively ended. For the next hour, we listened to Sophie's enthusiastic recounting of her wildlife observations, ate the lunch my father prepared, sandwiches with the crusts meticulously removed, carrot sticks arranged in perfect parallel lines, and maintained the fiction that this was just a normal family visit. As we prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside while Sophie gathered her things. Whatever's happening with Eliza, he said quietly, remember that Sophie needs at least one parent she can count on absolutely. Be that parent, Daniel. The advice stung with its implication that I might follow his example, that abandonment was hereditary, a pattern I might unconsciously repeat. But beneath my reflexive defensiveness, I recognized the truth in his words and the regret. I'm not you, I said. No, he agreed, something like pride flickering across his features. You're better than I was. Always have been. The drive home was quieter, Sophie tired from the day's activities. As we neared our neighborhood, she looked up from her tablet. Dad? Is Mom really coming home next week? My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Why do you ask? She shrugged, her small shoulders rising and falling beneath her seatbelt. Just wondering. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her face serious in the fading afternoon light. What would you think if she needed to stay a little longer? For her work? Sophie considered this, her brow furrowing in the exact way Eliza's did when she was thinking deeply. I'd be sad, but I guess it would be okay if it's important. She paused. Are you sad that she's gone? Sometimes, I admitted, navigating the careful line between honesty and protection. But I'm always happy when I'm with you. She seemed satisfied with this answer, returning to her game. But her question lingered, demanding a more complete response than I could give her. Was I sad? Yes, but not in the simple way she meant. I was sad for what had been lost, for what might never have existed in the first place. I was sad for the version of our marriage I'd believed in until a week ago. But beneath the sadness was something else taking shape, a determination I barely recognized in myself. My father's words echoed. Sophie needs at least one parent she can count on absolutely. I would be that parent. Whatever happened next, whatever choices Eliza made upon her return, I would be the constant in our daughter's life. And for the first time, I understood that this might mean making difficult decisions that had nothing to do with waiting patiently for my wife to remember she loved us. That night, after Sophie was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and began to make notes. Not about confrontation or reconciliation, but about practicalities. Our mortgage, Sophie's school, the bookstore's finances, what it would cost, financially and emotionally, to dismantle a life and build something new from its components. For 12 years, I had defined myself as one half of a whole. Daniel and Eliza, a unit, a partnership, an us. Now I needed to consider the possibility of being simply Daniel, a father, a bookstore owner, a man starting over. The thought was terrifying. It was also in some deep, quiet place I was only beginning to access, strangely liberating. 2 weeks after Eliza left, her business trip officially over, I received the text I'd been both dreading and expecting. Need to extend a trip. Some complications with the client. Will explain everything when I'm back. Give Sophie extra hugs from me. Love you both. I stared at the message, noting the careful vagueness, the lack of details that might be verified or challenged. Had she planned this extension all along, or had something changed in Barcelona? Had Julian met her expectations, exceeded them, or was she already discovering that escape carried its own kind of confinement? I didn't reply. What was there to say? I know you're lying. I know you're with him. Come home and explain yourself to our daughter. Or worse, I miss you. I need you. Please come back, and we'll pretend this never happened. Instead, I set the phone down and went to check on Sophie, who was working on homework at the kitchen table. 2 weeks of maintaining the fiction that everything was normal had taken its toll. I was sleeping poorly, losing weight, going through the motions of work and parenting with a mechanical precision that felt nothing like living. Twice, Maya had pulled me aside at the bookstore to ask what was wrong, and twice I'd deflected with vague references to stress and Eliza's absence. Dad? Sophie looked up from her math worksheet. Are you okay? You're doing that staring thing again? I blinked, realizing I'd been standing in the doorway watching her, without really seeing her. Just thinking about dinner. How's the homework coming? It's fractions, she said, as if this explained everything. Ah, the eternal enemy. I moved to sit beside her, grateful for the concrete problem to focus on. Let me see. For the next 20 minutes, we worked through equivalent fractions together, and I felt almost normal. A father helping his daughter. Nothing more complicated than that. But as Sophie completed the last problem, her expression grew serious. Is Mom really still coming back next week? Because Lily's having a birthday party and she needs to know who's coming. I hesitated, caught between the truth and the lie I'd been maintaining. I think Mom might need to stay a bit longer in Chicago. For work. But I can take you to Lily's party. Sophie's lower lip trembled slightly. It's been forever since she left. I know, sweetheart. Does she miss us? Because if she missed us a lot, wouldn't she come home? The question cut straight to the heart of what I'd been avoiding. How to explain to a 10-year-old that missing someone isn't always enough? That adults sometimes make choices that hurt the people they love without intending to? That her mother was currently deciding whether the life she'd built with us was the one she wanted to keep? I think, I said carefully, that your mom loves you very much. And sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings that are hard to explain. Like when you're happy and sad at the same time? Exactly like that. I brushed her hair back from her forehead, marveling at how she could distill complex emotional truths to their essence. How about we make those cookies you like for dessert? The ones with the chocolate chunks? Later that night, after Sophie was finally asleep, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back porch, staring at the small square of yard where Sophie's swing set stood, unused now that she'd outgrown it, but neither of us had the heart to dismantle. Like so many things in our home, it was a marker of time passing, of phases completed, of small griefs accumulated alongside joys. The second glass of wine hit harder than the first. By the third, I was moving through the house with restless energy, unable to settle. In our bedroom, still technically our bedroom, though I'd been sleeping in the guest room, I stood before Eliza's closet, sliding my hand along the hanging clothes she'd left behind. Each garment triggered a memory. The blue dress she'd worn to my mother's funeral, the sweater she put on when she was sick, The paint-stained jeans from when we'd redecorated Sophie's room 2 years ago. The rage, when it finally came, arrived without warning. A sudden, overwhelming urge to tear these artifacts from their hangers, to destroy the evidence of a shared life that might no longer exist. My hands shook as I gripped a silky blouse, one she'd worn to Sophie's last school concert. For a moment, I thought I might actually rip it to shreds. Instead, I sank to the floor, the blouse still clutched in my fist, and let myself feel everything I'd been suppressing for 2 weeks, the hurt, the anger, the humiliation of being left behind while she explored what was possible with another man. The fear that our entire marriage had been built on my willingness to ignore her restlessness. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the storm passed, leaving an unexpected clarity in its wake. I folded the blouse carefully and returned it to its hanger. Then I went to Sophie's room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep, one arm flung above her head, her breathing deep and even, utterly trusting that when she woke, her world would be as she'd left it. In that moment, looking at my daughter, I made my decision. I would not wait for Eliza to determine our fate. I would not sit passively while she decided whether our life together was enough for her. I would not allow Sophie to see me diminished by betrayal, afraid of change, desperate for her mother's return. Instead, I would take control of what I could. I would build something new for Sophie and me, something stable and honest, defined by choice rather than inertia. And when Eliza finally returned, she would find not a husband waiting to forgive or condemn, but a man who had already moved forward. The next morning I called Maya. "I need to talk," I said when she answered. "Not at the store, somewhere private." 3 hours later we sat at her kitchen table, mugs of tea between us. I told her everything. The affair, the trip to Barcelona, the texts, the simmering anger and sudden clarity. Maya listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to sympathy to something fiercer. "What are you going to do?" she asked when I finished. "I'm going to sell the house," I said, the words strange but right in my mouth. "Find somewhere new for Sophie and me, somewhere without memories of Eliza in every room." Maya nodded slowly. "And when Eliza comes back? Because she will, Daniel. Women like her always do once the fantasy collides with reality. Then she'll find us gone." I took a breath, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "She'll have to decide if she wants to be part of our new life, but it will be on different terms." "That's—" Maya paused, considering. "That's actually kind of badass, Daniel Mercer." I smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel badass, it feels terrifying." "The best decisions usually do." She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm with you, whatever you need. But are you sure this is nuclear?" "I'm sure," I said. And I was. Sophie deserves better than a father who's waiting for her mother to choose us. And I deserve better than wondering every day if today's the day Eliza decides we're enough for her. Maya's eyes softened. "Yes," she said simply. "You do." Over the next hour, we sketched out a rough plan. I would contact a realtor. I would research new neighborhoods, new schools for Sophie. I would consult a lawyer about separation, possibly divorce. And through it all, I would protect Sophie from as much pain as possible, presenting the move as an adventure, a fresh start, rather than an ending. As I left Maya's apartment, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not happy. Nothing this complicated could be described as happiness, but purposeful. For the first time since discovering Eliza's betrayal, I was moving rather than frozen, choosing rather than reacting. That night I researched coastal towns within driving distance, places where Sophie and I could start over, where the bookstore could relocate, where the constant reminders of what we'd lost wouldn't surround us. I created spreadsheets comparing housing costs, school ratings, quality of life indicators. I wrote lists of what we would take and what we would leave behind. And with each decision, each plan made, I felt myself becoming someone new, someone defined not by abandonment but by agency. A week later, I received another text from Eliza. Things still complicated here. Need another week to sort everything out. Miss you both terribly. Kiss Sophie for me. I replied with one word, okay. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance. It was acknowledgement of her message, of the lie it contained, of the space it created for what I needed to do next. As I set down the phone, I caught my reflection in the window, a man I was just beginning to recognize, with a determination in his eyes that had been absent for too long. The house would go on the market tomorrow. The letter to Eliza was already drafted, waiting for her return. And somewhere along the coast, a new life was taking shape, one I was finally ready to claim. The for sale sign appeared in our front yard on a Tuesday morning. Sophie noticed it when we left for school, her small hand tightening in mine. "We're selling our house?" Her voice wavered between curiosity and alarm. I crouched to her level, the speech I'd rehearsed suddenly inadequate. "Yes, I thought we could have an adventure, you and me. Find a place near the ocean like we've talked about." "What about Mom? Won't she be sad if she comes home and we're gone?" The question I'd been dreading. "Mom will know where to find us, but sometimes grown-ups need to make changes when things aren't working right." "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" Directness, Sophie's defining trait. I exhaled slowly. "I don't know yet, but I do know that I love you more than anything, and that won't ever change." The house sold in 9 days, a record, according to our realtor. The new owners, a young couple expecting their first child, loved the built-in bookshelves, the window seat in Sophie's room, the garden Eliza had meticulously planned. They wanted to move in as soon as possible. Everything was accelerating, as if the universe approved of my decision. Each night, I sorted through our possessions, making 3 piles: take, leave, storage. Sophie helped, approaching the task with surprising practicality once I'd framed it as preparing for our beach adventure. But sometimes I'd find her holding something, a family photo, a souvenir from a trip, with an expression that made my heart contract. "We can take anything that's important to you," I told her, watching her deliberate over a ceramic turtle Eliza had bought her in Mexico. "I'm keeping this," she decided, placing it carefully in her treasure box, a shoebox now filled with talismans against forgetting. Packing Eliza's things was harder. Each item required a decision fraught with symbolism: the wedding album, her grandmother's serving dishes, the stack of birthday cards I'd given her over the years. Eventually, I settled on a middle path, storing the most significant items, leaving the rest for her to sort upon her return. It felt both merciful and pointed, this careful curation of what remained. Through it all, I maintained my daily routines: opening the bookstore, helping with homework, making dinner, reading bedtime stories. The ordinary tasks of living while everything changed. 1 month after Eliza left, I sat at our dining room table and wrote her a letter explaining my decision. Not an accusation or a plea, but a clear account of what I'd discovered and what would happen next. The address of our new home, details about Sophie's new school, the name of my lawyer. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I wrote in conclusion. "I'm doing it because I've spent too many years waiting. For you to be content, for you to be present, for you to choose us definitively. I don't want Sophie to learn that waiting for someone else's approval is how you build a life. I don't want to teach her that love means constantly accommodating another person's restlessness. We'll be waiting when you're ready to talk, but we won't be waiting here." I sealed the letter and left it with our neighbor, Janet, with instructions to give it to Eliza when she returned. Then I picked up Sophie from her last day at her old school, and we drove toward the coast, toward the small town where I'd already rented a cottage and initiated purchase of a struggling local bookstore. "Do you think there will be dolphins?" Sophie asked as the city receded behind us. "Probably," I said, though I had no idea. "We'll have to find out together." The coastal town of Seabbrook welcomed us with salt air and skeptical locals. Our cottage, weathered gray shingles, creaky floors, windows that caught the morning light, sat 2 blocks from the ocean. Close enough to hear the waves at night, far enough to avoid the worst tourist traffic in summer. The bookstore I'd bought was on the main street, a narrow space wedged between a bakery and a maritime supply shop. Previous owners had named it the Reading Nook, which felt too precious to keep. Sophie helped me paint a new sign. Mercer Books. Simple. Definitive. Ours. "We need a cat," she declared on our second day. "Bookstores have to have cats. It's like a rule." A week later, we adopted an orange tabby from the local shelter. Sophie named him Captain, and he immediately claimed the sunny window seat as his domain, much to the delight of customers. Each day brought new routines. Sophie riding her bike to the small local school, me learning the rhythms of a tourist town in off-season, quiet mornings in the bookstore, beach walks at sunset, dinner at the small kitchen table where we'd started keeping a list of things we saw today, a practice that began as distraction but evolved into genuine gratitude. I waited for Sophie to ask about Eliza, prepared explanations for her absence, but the questions came less frequently as weeks passed. Instead, she focused on immediate concerns: a science project, a new friend, whether we could paint her bedroom blue, like the ocean but brighter. 3 months after leaving the city, I was restocking shelves when my phone rang. Eliza's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I considered not answering, letting it go to voicemail, maintaining the boundary I'd established. But Sophie would be home soon, and this conversation needed to happen without her present. "Hello?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Silence then. "The house is gone." Eliza's voice, tearful and accusing. "Janet gave me your letter. How could you just... Where's Sophie? Where are you?" "We're safe. We're settling in. Sophie's doing well in her new school." "You had no right," she said, anger replacing shock. "You just disappeared with our daughter? Sold our house? What kind of—" "You left first," I interrupted, surprising myself with my calm. "You disappeared with your lover. You lied about where you were going and how long you'd be gone. You forfeited the right to be consulted about what happened in your absence." Another silence, this one heavier. "I was coming back," she finally said, her voice smaller. "I always intended to come back." "To what, Eliza? To the life you were so desperate to escape that you lied to your husband and abandoned your daughter? Was a month with Julian enough to satisfy your curiosity about what might be possible, or did you need more time?" "That's not fair." "No," I agreed. "None of this is fair, especially not to Sophie." I heard her inhale sharply at our daughter's name. "I want to see her. You can't keep her from me." "I never intended to. There's a spare room in our cottage. You can stay here when you visit. We'll work out a schedule that prioritizes her stability." "Just like that? We're separated? Divorced? After 12 years of marriage, you make this decision unilaterally? You made your decision unilaterally when you went to Barcelona. I made mine when I realized I couldn't continue living in suspended animation, waiting for you to decide if we were enough for you." After we hung up, I sat in the empty bookstore, shaking. The confrontation I'd been rehearsing for months was over, and I felt neither vindicated nor relieved, just hollow, as if I'd used the last of my emotional reserves to remain composed. That evening, I told Sophie her mother had returned and wanted to see her. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. Not pure joy, but a complicated mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Will she stay here with us?" she asked, practical as always. "She'll visit," I said carefully. "She can stay in the spare room when she does. But for now, this is our home, yours and mine." Sophie nodded, processing this. "Is she mad that we moved?" "She was surprised," I said, choosing honesty over protection where I could. "But she'll adjust, just like we did." Later, after Sophie was asleep, I sat on our small porch with a glass of whiskey, listening to the distant surf. The confrontation with Eliza had broken something loose inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of acceptance. This was our reality now. All the plans and decisions I'd made in the heat of betrayal would now have consequences, ripples I'd have to navigate with Sophie's well-being as my compass. I wasn't the man Eliza had left behind. That version of Daniel Mercer, accommodating, conflict-avoidant, defined by his role as husband, had been dismantled along with our house. The man who remained was still discovering his dimensions, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never again make himself smaller to make someone else comfortable. Eliza arrived on a Friday afternoon, parking her car in front of our cottage with deliberate precision. Through the bookstore window, I watched her sit for several minutes, visibly collecting herself before approaching. She looked both familiar and foreign, the same honey blonde hair and delicate features, but something altered in her posture, her presence. "She's here," I told Sophie, who was arranging a display of ocean-themed children's books. She froze, then carefully placed the last book before turning to me. "Can I go outside?" "Of course." I touched her shoulder lightly. "I'll be right here if you need me." Through the window, I watched their reunion, Sophie's cautious approach, Eliza crouching to her level, their embrace that began tentatively, then tightened as mutual recognition overtook uncertainty. I stepped away from the window, giving them privacy, while remaining close enough to intervene if Sophie needed me. An hour later, having closed the bookstore early, I sat across from Eliza at a beachside cafe, neutral territory for our first real conversation. Sophie was playing on the adjacent playground, visible but not within earshot. "She seems happy," Eliza said, watching our daughter navigate the monkey bars. "Settled, even." "She is, mostly. She has good days and harder ones. She misses you." Eliza's eyes, when they met mine, were red-rimmed but direct. "I missed her every day. More than I expected, more than I knew was possible." A pause. "I missed you too." I let the statement hang between us, unwilling to reciprocate or deny. "What happened in Barcelona, Eliza?" She looked away, toward the ocean. "Reality happened. Julian wasn't what I thought. Or maybe he was exactly what I thought, and that was the problem." "You'll have to be more specific." She twisted her wedding ring, still wearing it, I noticed, with a jolt of something between surprise and irritation. For the first 2 weeks, it was exactly what I'd imagined. The freedom, the spontaneity, discovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. Julian knew how to make everything feel significant, charged with possibility. And then I realized that significance isn't the same as meaning, that spontaneity becomes exhausting when it's constant, that Julian was interested in the idea of me, not the reality. She met my eyes again. "He left me in a hotel in Barcelona. Said he'd met a photojournalist who was heading to Morocco for an assignment. Said I'd become heavier than he expected." I absorbed this, surprised by my lack of satisfaction at Julian's predictable betrayal. "So you stayed another month because I was ashamed. Because I didn't know how to come back and explain what I'd done. Because I needed to figure out if I'd destroyed my marriage because I didn't want it anymore, or because I didn't know how to want what I already had. And your conclusion? She hesitated, then said quietly, I think I've spent so long looking for something missing that I never fully appreciated what was there. That's a convenient realization to have when your alternatives disappear. Her flinch was almost imperceptible. I deserve that. I deserve your anger, your distrust. But Sophie doesn't deserve to be caught between us. On that, we agree completely. We watched Sophie in silence for several minutes, each lost in private calculations. I've taken a short-term rental in town, Eliza finally said. I spoke with the school about volunteering. I want to be part of Sophie's life consistently, not just flying in for visits. I nodded, unsurprised. Eliza had always been decisive once she committed to a course of action. That's your choice. But I need to be clear about something. Whatever happens between us, whether we find a way forward together or apart, I'm not moving back to the city. This is home now, for Sophie and me. I understand, she said, and I believed she did. I'm not asking for things to go back to how they were. I don't think either of us wants that, really. The rest of the conversation focused on logistics, a visitation schedule, how to handle Sophie's questions, the legal separation I'd already initiated. Throughout, we maintained a careful civility that felt nothing like our old easy intimacy, but was preferable to the anger I'd anticipated. As we prepared to leave, Eliza hesitated, then asked, The bookstore, is it working out? It's getting there, I said, surprised by her interest. Different clientele than the city, but I'm learning what sells here. The summer tourist season should help. She nodded, looking down at her hands. You seem, I don't know, more certain. It suits you. The comment lingered as we collected Sophie and walked back to the cottage, a reluctant acknowledgement that something good had emerged from our fracture. That night, after Eliza left with promises to see Sophie the next day, I found our daughter sitting on her bed, the ceramic turtle from Mexico in her hands. You okay, kiddo? I asked, sitting beside her. She nodded slowly. Mom's different. How so? Sadder. She turned the turtle over, examining its painted bottom. But also more, here? Like she's really listening when I talk. Out of the mouths of babes. People sometimes need to lose things before they understand their value. Sophie considered this. Like when I couldn't find my blue sweater, and then when Maya found it for me, I wore it every day for a week? I smiled, grateful for her ability to find relatable analogies. Something like that? She placed the turtle on her nightstand, positioning it carefully. I'm glad we live here now, but I'm also glad Mom knows where we are. Me too, I said, and realized I meant it. Spring arrived with wild flowers along the coastal paths and increased foot traffic in the bookstore. Sophie turned 11, celebrating with a small party on the beach, new friends from school, Maya who drove in for the weekend, and Eliza, carefully maintaining the boundaries we'd established. Our life had found its rhythm. Sophie spent weekends and one weeknight with Eliza in her rented bungalow. I had dinner with my father twice a month, these visits gradually less awkward as we established a new relationship based on present connection, rather than past grievances. The bookstore gained loyal customers, locals who appreciated my willingness to order obscure titles, and tourists charmed by Captain the Cat. And I was changing too, in ways both subtle and profound. I spoke more directly, less concerned with smoothing rough edges. I made decisions without second-guessing myself. I reconnected with old interests, photography, distance running, contemporary poetry, that had gradually been set aside in my marriage. One Tuesday afternoon, a woman entered the bookstore, browsing the local authors section with evident interest. Tall, with dark curly hair and glasses that kept sliding down her nose, she eventually approached the counter with a stack of books. "You must be Daniel," she said, setting her selections down. "I'm Leah Winters. I edit for Coastal Press." "The publishing house that did that series on maritime history?" I asked, recognizing her name from book jackets. "Those sold well here." "Glad to hear it." She smiled, warm and direct. "I just moved to town from Portland. Someone mentioned this was the place to find good recommendations." We talked books for 20 minutes, the conversation flowing with surprising ease. She was knowledgeable without being pretentious, funny in a dry, understated way that made me laugh genuinely for what felt like the first time in months. "I should let you get back to work," she said eventually, glancing at her watch. "But maybe we could continue this sometime? There's a new cafe on Harbor Street I've been meaning to try." The invitation hung between us, casual yet unmistakable. A year ago, I would have deflected automatically, retreating to the safety of established boundaries. Now I found myself considering possibilities rather than threats. "I'd like that," I said simply. Later that week, over coffee that stretched into lunch, Leah told me about her divorce 3 years earlier, her decision to leave a prestigious publishing job in New York for a smaller press where she could focus on regional writers, her gradual rebuilding of a life guided by choice rather than convention. "The hardest part wasn't the heartbreak," she said, breaking a piece of bread. "It was the disorientation, realizing that the future I'd been moving toward had disappeared, and I had to create a new one without a map." "I'm still in that phase," I admitted. "Some days I wake up and have to remind myself where I am, who I am now." "It gets easier," she said, not reaching for my hand or offering empty reassurances, just stating a truth she'd lived. Not in a straight line, but generally upward. We began seeing each other cautiously. Coffee, walks on the beach, eventually dinner at her small apartment overlooking the harbor. I told Sophie after our third meeting, careful to frame it as friendship with potential rather than romance. "Is she nice?" Sophie asked, her primary concern. "Very. Smart, too. She knows everything about books." "Does Mom know?" A more complicated question. "Not yet, but I'll tell her if things become more serious." Sophie nodded, absorbing this new development. "It's weird," she said finally. "But maybe good weird? Like when you put potato chips in a sandwich and it shouldn't work, but it does." I laughed, pulling her into a hug. Exactly like that. Telling Eliza was harder, undertaken during one of our co-parenting check-ins after Sophie was asleep. Her expression remained carefully neutral as I explained about Leah, but I knew her well enough to recognize the effort this cost her. "Are you asking my permission?" she asked when I finished. "No," I said honestly. "I'm telling you out of respect for our shared responsibility to Sophie. She knows, and I didn't want her to feel she was keeping secrets from you." Eliza nodded, looking away. "Thank you for that." A pause, then, "Is it serious?" "It's new," I said. "But it feels healthy, grounded in who we are now, not who we were before." Later that evening, alone in the cottage, I realized we'd had our first conversation that wasn't shadowed by recrimination or sadness, just two adults sharing information relevant to their child's well-being. A small victory in the ongoing project of redefining our relationship. Summer arrived with tourist season, the bookstore bustling with visitors seeking beach reads and local interest titles. Leah and I settled into a comfortable rhythm, seeing each other a few times a week, gradually increasing Sophie's involvement as the relationship deepened. Eliza found a marketing position with a local tourism board, seemingly committed to her new life in Seabbrook. One evening in late August, I stood on the beach watching Sophie and Leah hunt for sea glass at the water's edge. Behind me, someone approached. Footsteps I still recognized after all this time. "She looks happy," Eliza said, stopping beside me. "Sophie, I mean, she is, I think, most days." We stood in companionable silence, watching the two figures bent in conversation over their finds. "I signed the divorce papers," Eliza said finally. "They'll be filed tomorrow." I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of sadness and relief. "Thank you. It's the right thing, for all of us." She glanced at me. "Leah seems good for you. Grounded." "She is." I hesitated, then added, "How about you? Are you seeing anyone?" "Not yet. I'm trying to figure out who I am on my own first. Something I should have done a long time ago." The honesty between us felt new and fragile, a careful construction that could still collapse under the weight of old patterns. But it was there. The possibility of a different kind of connection, based on truth rather than accommodation. As the sun began to set, Sophie ran toward us, hand extended to display her sea glass collection. Leah followed more slowly, giving us space for this family moment that included and excluded her simultaneously. "Mom, Dad, look what we found!" Sophie's voice carried on the evening air, joyful and certain. Standing there on the beach, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The betrayal, the grief, the rebuilding, the unexpected discoveries. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this configuration of people, this version of myself, this life we were carefully constructing from the remains of what had broken. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I'd planned. But as I watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the water in shades of gold and rose, I recognized it for what it was, not an ending, but a beginning. Chosen deliberately, lived authentically, rooted in the courage to leave what no longer served and build something truer in its place. When Eliza secretly traveled with her lover, she returned to find our house sold, and me gone. What she couldn't have known was that her departure had set us both free. Not in the way she'd imagined, but in the way we'd needed all along.